President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe may be fired after visiting Syria and meeting President Assad.
I will be a patriot president against the threat of nationalism.
Macron never broke with Hollande. He just created the appearance of doing so.
The two remaining French presidential candidates are on the attack. Independent contender Emmanuel Macron says he's against the threat of nationalism. Marine Le Pen hits back, accusing him of tricking voters. The UK Independence Party has revealed its new agenda, calling for bans on the Islamic burqa, veil and Sharia courts. We'll get opinions from both sides this hour. This is RT International coming to you live from Moscow. I'm Marina Joshi. Welcome to the program. The president of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe has landed himself in trouble for having visited Syria and met President Assad. Let's now cross to Polly Boyko, who joins us live from London. Hi there, Polly. So why is the PACE president in hot water for that?
Well, look, Pedro Agramunt, he's a Spanish politician, he's a member of the Spanish Senate, and he also happens to be the president of PACE. But he might not be for much longer, because he is in big trouble with some of his fellow PACE members. They've called for his impeachment as president, and they're chairing a special session about it today. All because of Agramunt's visit to Syria that he made in March. He says he went there in a personal capacity as a Spanish politician, not as the president of PACE. And it was a joint visit. He went there with Russian and European politicians. And while they were there, they did meet up with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. And when the PACE delegates found out about all of this, they were absolutely livid. And the whole thing sparked so much anger that Agramunt was forced to issue a confession, or rather an apology. Take a listen to what he had to say.
This visit was a mistake, and I realized this after having seen the consequences. Since the beginning of my mandate, I have made 50 official visits, and no questions were raised about these.
Well, that wasn't that wasn't the whole apology. He also apologized for not informing the necessary PACE authorities that he was going, because, of course, he went as a politician from Spain. He only informed the Spanish government, not the necessary office in PACE. He also mentioned that the Russian media had somehow manipulated his visit, although he didn't elaborate on who it was, who'd published anything, or how they had manipulated it. So his fate as president is being decided in a PACE session right now. But travelling to Syria isn't really looked upon kindly at the moment by either European or US politicians. Last year, the European Parliament refused to pay for several of its MEPs' trips to Syria. Brussels had said that actually it's your own responsibility. We're not going to pay for this trip. And a similar thing happened over in the US to a congresswoman from Hawaii. Her name is Tulsi Gabbard. She's an Iraq war veteran, and she's quite critical of US foreign policy in Syria. She said that she wants to see for herself the evidence about the alleged crimes committed by Bashar al-Assad. So she travelled to Syria on what she called a fact-finding mission. But that was met with absolute outrage by politicians over in the US. So it's almost become like a bit of a witch hunt around anybody who wants to see what is happening on the ground in Syria with their own eyes. And that seems completely incompatible with talk of wanting to end the civil war in Syria, because how are you supposed to end the war there if visiting the country and talking to its president could cost you your job?
All right, Polly, thanks so much for bringing us this update on the situation. Polly Boyka, they're live from London. And right now we can cross to Peter Ford, former UK ambassador to Syria, to discuss this issue in more detail. Well, Peter, thanks so much for joining us here on RT. I hope you've heard what our correspondent brought us from London, the update on the story. So what are your thoughts? Why does any Western official who travels to Syria trying to find out what's actually happening there become the target of severe criticism?
It's a reflection of the hysteria following the chemical weapons incident in Idlib. I think without that incident, Mr. Agramont would not be in this hot water now. But in the present atmosphere of hysteria, it is impossible to get a fair hearing about Syria, or to make a fact-finding visit to Syria, or to have any contact with Syria at all. Minds in the media and in Western governments are virtually closed, and we are in a period of total hysteria. It's the only way to explain it. And it is in particular being reported as fact that Assad used chemical weapons, when this is far, far from being the case. There is supposed to be an investigation underway by inspectors of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Warfare, which the West is preventing from going to the site of the attack. It's unbelievable that they're stopping the inspectors going there, but this is the case. It was discussed only yesterday.
How can you break through this vicious circle then? I mean, we have the situation where on the one hand the Western officials are constantly calling for the settlement of the Syrian conflict, but how can you actually achieve anything here if any person going to Syria gets stigmatized?
It is impossible to have a rational discussion of Syria at the moment in many Western countries. There are too many vested interests that want to prevent a rational discussion. Anyone who tries to be objective is immediately personally attacked. I speak with some self-interest. After Aleppo, there seemed to be a window of opportunity when there could be rational discussion and when outsiders could encourage proper negotiations in Geneva or Astana. But many people, the warmonger parties in America and elsewhere, were very disappointed by this and have seized the opportunity of the Idlib incident to row back and to recover lost propaganda ground.
All right, Peter Ford, former UK ambassador to Syria, thanks so much for talking to us here on RT International. Now, the UN's expressed serious concern for the fate of hundreds of thousands of civilians trapped in the Syrian city of Raqqa, and they've been exposed to intense daily fighting amid the ongoing US-led military operation against ISIL.
التحالف يضرب المدنيين والسور، واحنا انهزمنا من بيوتنا يضرب بش اسمه بالدواعش وشي، واحنا انهزمنا تحارب بيناتهم وانهزمنا بالليل.
طلعنا من القصف من الرقة، احنا من محافظة الرقة، طلعنا من القصف، رحنا حتى بدنا نطلع ما يخلونا نطلع، جينا على المهربية كل شخص 75,000، وطلعنا طريق صعوبة بشكل يعني مشي 3-4 ساعات.
وناس يعني معاقين وناس مرضى وناس يعني اخر شيء زتينا تشانتينا بالارض اللي اخذين معنا ما احسن تشيل العالم اللي يعني جد شيء معاناه يعني ما توصف.
The UN Secretary General's deputy spokesperson also highlighted recent cases when coalition airstrikes reportedly killed civilians.
Airstrikes in Atabaka city reportedly killed 8 people, including 5 children, and damaged 2 schools. On the 22nd of April, dozens of people were reportedly killed and injured in airstrikes on camps for internally displaced people near Al-Barda village, about 20 kilometers west of Raqqa.
Well, there are worries about how this operation will affect civilians. We're concerned about the safety and protection of more than 400,000 people in Raqqa as these operations commence, and we're urging all parties to abide by international human rights and international humanitarian law so that civilians can be spared the consequences both of the actions by Daesh and by the airstrikes. But we want to make sure that whatever operations are conducted, they will bear in mind that there's a huge number of civilians who are trying to flee to safety.
Meanwhile, reports have emerged Islamic State's moved its self-proclaimed capital from Raqqa to the province of Deir ez-Zor. Media outlets making the claim cited unnamed American defense officials. We tried to clarify the situation and requested comment from U.S. Central Command. Well, despite all the reports and warnings by the UN, the U.S. military has made it clear it's still focused on the fighting in Raqqa. Archie's Lisa Phelan has more on the background.
Before this warning by the United Nations, there has been a growing concern and alarm about the rising number of civilian casualties by the American-led operation against ISIL in Iraq and Syria. Now, the coalition says that since 2014, of 20,205 strikes have killed 229 civilians. Now, the coalition acknowledges that its figures are most likely a serious underestimate, but it doesn't seem as though they're too bothered about seriously looking into whether the operations that are supposed to liberate people from the tyranny of ISIL are in fact causing avoidable harm to those very same civilians.
In fact, the entire U.S. operation in Iraq and Syria is not being investigated properly. How can you liberate people from oppression while you're killing them by the thousands, certainly not the hundreds that are being done? The political downside of having U.S. troops involved is very high right now, so the U.S. would rather use bombs, use weapons that don't require a massive influx of U.S. troops, so you don't have any U.S. casualties, which would be very unpopular back home. So essentially, civilians on the ground are being sacrificed for political reasons back home in the U.S. What no one is asking is why we're involved in these 2 battles in the first place.